The greedy little brats of dragons have clawed their way to my paint table. These little guys are seemingly inspired by their much larger predecessors, the classic dragons of Heroscape from times past, represented by Praxis, Niflheim, and Memmering respectively. These dragons have signature styles, and I wanted to copy their original look as much as possible. Having an unpainted dragon is not befitting these spoiled royalty, so let's put brush to model and get the Scions of Icaria all painted up. For all the dragons, I did do a zenithal prime to make painting the several squads of these much faster and easier. I started off with a black undercoat and then sprayed directly over above with a white spray paint. This makes the process easier as we naturally simulate these shadows in the highlighted areas. First up to bat is Baby Praxis, and I found this one to be the most difficult of the bunch, as the shape and model have some small details and more inaccessible areas. While painting this, I got a set of Chimera inks, which I used for several of these dragons in this video. The inks have a great flow, a bit of transparency, and I found them to have a similar sheen as compared to the OG dragons. If you don't have the inks, you of course can use standard black acrylic, thinned down. It helps to keep the black paint a bit thin and transparent, as it allows a small bit of the white underlayer to shine through, giving the black coloring more dimension, compared to looking relatively flat. If you notice, I'm taking care to avoid the areas of the wings with color in them, as the white underlayer will help make the orange we apply later a whole lot more vibrant and a lot more easily applied. I find it helps to use a painting handle of sorts to better angle the model, and use the side of your brush for a bit better control. Make sure your paint isn't too thin on the wings, as you ideally would like to avoid the runny paint going to the areas you section off. If you do get a bit of overrush or overflow, no worries. We'll cover this up and fix it with the base color of the wings in later steps. For the scoots of the dragon, or the belly scales in layman's terms, I use an off blue gray, which is a nice color to more easily build into a more neutral gray we'll be using later. I used the handle again to make sure I was able to hit the front, sides, and the underbelly. For the wings, we're going with a light umber to clean up any mistakes made. And it's a nice underlayer that will act as a bit of shadow for the much brighter and transparent oranges applied. You definitely want to use a brush with a good tip to better and more accurately hit those deep curves found on the wings. Now we're going to add some highlights. I take a bright neutral gray and trace along the edges of the belly scales. I then use the edge of my brush and a dry brushing motion just to blend the outlines a bit more. I use the same colored paint, thinned down, and also applied to the curves of the horn. Since we have so many models of paint, I didn't spend focus too much on blending these down, but was really just caring more about adding a bit of highlight and contrast to separate the materials from the other colors applied. Orange is a very transparent color, so we will build over the darker brown tones previously applied. I mixed lava orange with a bit of yellow until I get the right tone, and thinly applied over the umber. For this part, it helps to spread the paint around following the curves. I tip the model towards me, angle it to get better control of the inner wing. For the eye, I use a brush with a very fine tip and use bright white, making a single point in a small raised area. For eyes, you definitely don't want the paint to be too runny, and I find it helps to lean my arms against the table for more support. After the white paint dried, I use a bit of fluorescent yellow, layering over the applied paint. I like using fluorescents for small eyes as they really make the limited area pop, as fluorescents naturally catch and retain more light. And next up, we're going to add some paratrooper tan to the claws and the teeth. Using the same finely tipped brush that we used for the eyes, we're going to make small, short lines for the teeth, trying to mark each individual tooth as well, and add a solid covering to the claws. If you struggle to do this, you can also just paint the entire area that color and add a dark wash to the mouth area. Looking to match the classic look and fill in the details more easily, I added a strong tone to the orange membranes. I thinned the wash down slightly as I wanted the wash to settle more comfortably in the thin lines and fill in some of the more inaccessible areas. I didn't want it to overtake the orange that has been applied though, so definitely make sure that the color still maintains and settles nicely in the recesses. If you notice, I follow the flow of the wings to spread the wash around to prevent rather unsightly pulling. I also use the wash for the toes to darken them as well, and applied a black tone over the gray areas to darken it a bit. It takes a little bit of finesse, but baby Braxis is now able to melt her enemies, with adult supervision of course. Next up is the Niffle Baby, the young snow dragon. If you look at the original dragon, he has a lot of blue and gray undertones, and I wanted to try to catch that in the model. Starting off, I used Payne's Gray, covering most of the dragon with this color. I enjoy base coating models that are eventually going to become white with this color. I feel like it creates a more rich and unique looking shading for the model. You definitely want to be able to hit the area between the wings, as there's some easily missable spots. I added some dark green brown to the dragon's Hamlet skull, making sure this is well painted because he's ever the thespian. When painting something that has a lot of different white parts, one wants to differentiate it to use warm and cool tones. White, like many other colors, exists on a spectrum of warm tones, cool tones, and neutral tones. And mixing them up and using variety adds a lot more interesting focal points while still reading mainly as white overall. This brown underlayer acts as a nice contrast compared to the bluish gray already used. For the scoots, let's once again differentiate the segment with different tones by adding a more neutral gray to those scales. The difference on the original model is subtle, but there is a little bit of an off color on Niflheim of old. I wanted to start building up some brighter tones, advancing beyond this blue-gray we have into more whiter tones. I decided to dry brush. I felt like it was a great way to easily build up and blend colors. When you dry brush, you want to load a soft bristled brush and remove the excess on a paper towel or texture palette. As the name suggests, dry brushing does involve having almost no moisture in the paint. However, I find it does help having a small, tiny bit of moisture on the brush, usually applied via sponge pad. This helps the paint appear less chalky when it's applied to the model. My camera cut off for the first layer, but I'm applying a bright neutral gray to the model. When you dry brush, you could apply it in layers like standard painting, and I recommend going over this with a few passes to really make the brightness the appropriate level. Next, I dry brush a pure bold white, covering less of the model, just to really solidify these blends and make the dragon feel appropriately chilly. Now, you may feel like you've gone a bit too bright when using pure white, so it helps to kind of blend all these colors used a bit down with some wash. I used Payne's Gray Wash from Monument just to kind of blend these colors back to their original base tone and soften them a bit. It also acts as a bit of a filter, better blending these colors together to make them appear more cohesive. For the horns, claws, and skull, I had a few layers of bright ivory. For the highlights of the skull, I use a stippling motion to give it a bit of texture, dabbing my brush in small dots. Using a similar method, I outlined the back spikes to make them stand out. And lastly, let's work on the details. I used the tip of my sable brush and added some bright sky blue into the circle area of the eyes. Again, this works if your point of your brush is really well maintained. For the teeth, I used the bright ivory and carefully traced out the individual teeth as well, making sure to maintain straight lines and that my paint was the right consistency, not too thin or not too thick, so that it easily flowed off the brush and caught the teeth of the model. If you're struggling with this area, you of course can dry brush a bit of that area and put a little bit of wash in the mouth to fill in the dark spaces of the teeth. The white scales may seem intimidating, but really it's just patience and taking your time building up the layers. To paint or not to paint is the question, hopefully one that this dragon can answer. And lastly, let's work on the Fireline Blaster and Training, Baby Memory. I found this one to be the hardest to get the right color for, but once figured out, it's probably the easiest of the Scions to paint. I mixed Hoplite Gold speed paint with Royal Brown ink, which resulted in a nice reddish copper color. The inks mix really well with the speed paint as both are designed for an easy flow. I found that mixing inks with the metallics is a great way to alter the color while still maintaining that sheen that metallics are known for. I applied it to over the entire model, save for the stomach area. You may want to do a couple of passes to make sure the model is adequately covered and that there's no spots shining through. For the belly, I used a bright pale green. It definitely is a bit brighter than the Memory belly, but I plan on using washes to tone it down. Sometimes when you're painting a model, you have to think of advance where you're going. And I know that a wash is going to darken the stomach area by several tones, so I respond appropriately. I use some bright ivory and apply the same color to the claws on the dragon as well. For the lizard snack, I used a dark green and then mixed it with a bright green to contrast the reds of the model, deviating a bit differently from the official model as I wanted his lizard snack to pop a bit more. For the tongue, I used a base layer of burnt red, and while that paint was still wet, I took a brighter, cooler burgundy and mixed them together to give it a bit of wet blending. For the eyes, we used burnt red as the base, and then added a bright red as the dot in the middle. Lastly, to seal it all in, we add a dark tone as a wash to add a bit more depth to the model and fill in some of the shading. You'll want to spread the wash evenly over the entire model like we mentioned before. This really helps downshift the tone to a more similar likeness. And soon you can get the paint on him and blast the battlefield. Or maybe just stop for a delicious snack. Overall, the Scions are really easy to paint, and they look rather nice on the battlefield right next to their much more strong parents. Of course, don't limit yourself to just the official colors. There's lots of cool dragons in Heroscape or in the Heroscape community that you can copy off of. So try some new schemes and you get your whole brood of brats appropriately colored, ready to nip at the heels of their opponents. And I'm the Heroscaper. If you like Heroscape or painting, check out these videos and be sure to subscribe for more content. As always, check out the affiliate link in the description below if you're planning on getting some Heroscape and want to help support the channel at no additional cost to you. I think that's all. So, bye.